Welcome to this brief history of Chinese herbal medicine. Chinese medicine has a long and complex history. This is a very brief introduction to the history of Chinese herbal medicine, intended to give you a broad overview of its development from its beginnings to more recent times. This overview should help you later to go into more detail on any topic that interests you, and at the same time appreciate its general context in Chinese history. Before I start talking about the history of Chinese medicine, I think it's worth saying a few words about herbal medicine in general. Herbal medicine has been used by humans of every culture since the dawn of mankind. In fact, herbalism may well predate humanity, as animals have been observed to seek out their own medicinals when they're sick. Chimpanzees, for example, sometimes chew on bitter leaves to medicate against parasites. Ötzi, the Iceman found on the Austrian-Italian border, and dating from some 5,000 years back, was found to be carrying birch fungus for treating worms. So herbalism was the dominant form of medicine in the whole world until the mid-19th century, when synthetic medicines were first introduced. In the 20th century, advances in synthetic medicines and their success in dealing with many diseases eclipsed the use of herbs in Western countries, and for diverse reasons their use has been severely limited in some of these countries. Elsewhere, herbalism was not abandoned, and continues to be practiced to this day. There are two things worth remembering. Herbs did treat many problems successfully over many centuries. Much of that wisdom was not written down and has since been lost. And secondly, that about half of modern synthetic medicines start off as plant products. So herbal medicine is not specific to China. And actually, Chinese herbal medicine isn't even the oldest recorded form of herbal medicine transmitted to us. There are two Egyptian texts, the Kahun Papyrus and the Ebers Papyrus, that have survived till today from almost 4,000 years ago. The Kahun Papyrus contains 34 gynecological prescriptions, and it's interesting to note that almost all ancient texts show an emphasis on the treatment of gynecological problems. So we should ask ourselves, what's special about traditional Chinese medicine, and Chinese herbal medicine in particular? First, it is a systematic method of herbal treatment, with rules that allow a doctor to go beyond the notion of herb X is good for condition Y. It allows for and presents an explanation for using combinations of herbs, with options for treating aspects of the disease that are specific to patients individually. This I find is unique among the different forms of herbal medicine I've encountered. Secondly, it has some 2,000 years of recorded continuity in practice. The Egyptian texts that I mentioned are more of a historical curiosity. And finally, there is also a long history of detailed case studies and success in dealing with certain problems. This is about the closest we can get to calling this evidence-based medicine. I think it's good to try to be realistic and avoid the idea that Chinese medical theory can provide a panacea for all diseases, and we should be careful about claiming that it is the definitive system for using herbs. But the points I just mentioned should make us appreciate the importance and usefulness of using TCM theory in herbal treatments. We cannot forget that Chinese medicine is Chinese. Although some people think that we can study Chinese medicine without reference to the Chinese language, I personally think there is a lot to be gained by referencing Chinese culture, its language, and its ideograms. I want to say a few words about the commonly accepted English nomenclature of traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM. In Chinese, what we call TCM is referred to as Zhong Yi Yao, which translates as Chinese medicine herbs. This is in contrast to Xi Yi, literally Western medicine. In the Chinese language, the word traditional, 传统, is not used. The Chinese currently use two systems of ideograms or scripts. The simplified script developed in the 1950s is used on the mainland, and the original, more complicated classic script is still used in Taiwan and Hong Kong. As a note, I'm mainly going to be using the modern script in these slides. The character for medicine has two forms in classic script. One has the ideogram for alcohol in its lower section, possibly as a means for disinfecting wounds. The other has the ideogram for a shaman. Interestingly, this same character is used for the word witch. This could point to some interesting ideas about male and female shamans, but that's just speculation. All TCM is based on a number of important books which are termed the classics, or Jing. Students of TCM in China have to internalize these classics. The most important of these books is the Huangdi Jing, which we will talk about in a moment. However, it should be noted that the practice of TCM is not monolithic in China. Historically, the practice of medicine was a family affair, with knowledge transferred from father to son, and family secrets being transmitted from generation to generation. China is a very large country, and the climate varies considerably in different parts of China. The north tends to be cold and dry, the south warm and damp. So certain herbs and certain forms of disease were more common in particular areas, giving rise to some regional specialization in disease treatment. Nevertheless, as TCM has become a university subject studied on the national level, a common national curriculum has been developed, which is followed by all the universities in China. So now to the history itself. To facilitate this presentation, I will divide the history of TCM into 5 convenient periods. The Han, the first period of consolidation of China as a single nation, dating from about 200 BCE to 200 CE. The Tang and the Song, a period of rich cultural development which was to influence much of Eastern Asia, dating from 618 to the end of the 13th century. This was followed by what many texts call the Jinyuan period. The Jurchens invaded the northern part of present-day China, and the Song established themselves in the south. This accounts for the coinciding dates. Both were conquered by the Mongols, who established the Han Dynasty. During this period, China was ruled by foreign emperors, but a number of important schools of Chinese medicine developed. The Ming and the Qing dynasties, where the current practices of TCM were developed. And finally, 20th and 21st century China, when TCM had to reconcile itself with modern Western medicine. The Han Dynasty started approximately 200 years BCE and ended some 400 years later, covering a period somewhat comparable to the Roman Empire in the West. Our story will start a little before this. The Zhou Dynasty, which began about 1000 BCE, went through a number of periods, including a golden age called Spring and Autumn that boasted Confucius and Lao Tzu. This was followed by a tumultuous period called the Warring States. At the end of the Warring States period, 7 states fought bloody wars vying for supremacy. China's present capital, Beijing, was a small garrison in the state of Yan in the north at that time. To the west you see the state of Qin, and it was this state that was to be the final victor. Qin Shi Huang was a ruthless king who succeeded in conquering all the other states, unifying them in 221 BCE into what was to become China. He enacted major economic and political reforms aimed at standardizing the diverse practices of the earlier Chinese states. However, his dynasty was short-lived, and it was only under the following 400-year Han Dynasty that the evolution of China as a single nation really took off. And it is in the Han Dynasty that the classics of Chinese medicine appear to take their form as we know them for the first time. This is a list of the main classics, and we shall talk about 3 of them in more detail in a moment. But before I start on the classics, we'll make one more small detour to an archaeological site called Ma Wangdui, which contained the library of an educated nobleman and was sealed in 168 BCE, that's to say early in the Han Dynasty. Ma Wangdui was important both for what was found there and for what was missing. It contained some of the oldest copies of certain classical texts found so far, such as the Yi Jing and a text on medicine called the Wu Shi Er Bing Fang, or Formulas for 52 Diseases. but it did not contain the oldest medical classics in the list I just gave. The Wushihar Bingfang presents a more primitive view of medicine and does not refer to the theories proposed in the Huang Dinei, which we will discuss in a moment. This indicates that the medical classics and their principles were not in common use before this date. And so we have an approximate dating for the beginnings of TCM as it is practiced today. Before that time, herbalism appears to have been practiced in China as anywhere else, that is, on the basis of empirical experience. This does not take away from the value of empirical herbalism, but it does limit its scope. The most important classic in Chinese medicine is the Huang Dinei, which states the basic principles of TCM and presents a more rigorous approach to medicine. Huang Dinei translates as the Yellow Emperor's internal classic. It is regarded as the most important classic of Chinese medicine. Although it was not found at Ma Wangdui, textual analysis proposes that many chapters were in fact composed during the preceding Warring States period. But the book as a whole appears not to have been compiled until the end of the Han Dynasty. It was edited into its final form by Wang Bing in the Tang Dynasty and printed for the first time in the Song Dynasty. The text is divided into 2 volumes, the Su Wen, or Plain Questions, which explains the basic theory, and the Ling Shu, or Spiritual Pivot, which discusses many aspects of acupuncture. These volumes, in turn, consist of chapters that appear to have been written by various authors at various times. The chapters are a series of dialogues between the Yellow Emperor and Qibo, who gives him instruction in medical matters. These dialogues outline the basic principles of classic Chinese medicine. The book proposes a theory of health and sickness based on balance, the balance of yin and yang, and the balance of wuxing, variously translated as the 5 transformations, movements, or misleadingly as the 5 elements. The concept of the 5 transformations was very important in Chinese thought at that time, and applied to almost every aspect of Chinese life, including government. In terms of herbal medicine, however, the Huang Dinei only mentions 13 basic formulas. The first herbal in China was the Shenlong Bencao, or the Divine Farmer's Treatise on Medicinals. It consisted not only of plants, but also of 67 animal products and 46 minerals. These were divided into 3 categories: the superior medicinals, which nourish life, the middle grade that nourish constitutional types, and the lower grade which expelled disease. Over the centuries, new herbals added further medicinals, and some modifications were made over time. One of the high points of this evolution was the Bencao Gangmu of Li Shizhen in the Ming Dynasty, which we shall talk about later. But it is useful to note that the Shenlong Bencao was the reference point for the next important classic we talk about. The third classic we consider from this period is the Shanghan Lun, or the Treatise on Cold Damage, a book astonishing in its almost scientific approach and detail. This was the first systematic presentation on the theory of Chinese herbalism. The book presents a complete theory on the development of certain diseases together with their treatment. It matches patients' signs and symptoms, including their pulse, with herbal formulas that give dosage, preparation details, and administration methods. Today, TCM students in China have to learn large portions of it by heart, and it continually offers much material for doctoral theses in China every year. The original text, the Shanghan Zabing Lun, was written by Zhang Zhongjing, who lived towards the end of the Han Dynasty. It was later edited into 2 volumes by Wang Shuhe, these volumes being the Shanghan Lun and the Jingui Yao Lue, or Essential Prescriptions from the Golden Cabinet. As a little aside, we tend to imagine that these texts were books, as I have shown in the illustration so far. The book form came very much later. The original texts were usually inscribed on bamboo, and occasionally on silk. As the bamboo texts were often stored vertically, the ends sometimes wore away or were rotted, resulting in lost text. To give some perspective, I want to mention what was happening in the world of medicine outside China. In Greece, Empedocles proposed the 4-element theory of matter, based on earth, fire, air, and water. and this has some parallels with the Chinese 5 transformations theory, which uses wood and metal instead of air. Hippocrates of Kos is often regarded as the father of Western medicine, and his theory of humours is used as a guide by some naturopaths to this day. Dioscorides wrote a book in Greek, which is more commonly known by its Latin name, De Materia Medica, which is the earliest herbal in Western culture. It continued to be a reference for some 1500 years. Galen of Pergamon treated the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, and was the most influential theorist of that time. His theories of bloodletting survived into the 19th century. Interestingly, he was a contemporary of Zhang Zhongjing, the author of the classic Shanghan Lun, mentioned before. Even more interesting is to compare the arrogance of Galen's style of writing with the modesty of Zhang Zhongjing. This concludes the first part of the presentation. The presentation will be continued in part 2.